Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 541, The Danes of Jutland. Pope Julius II felt ashamed to see Marin's embarrassing performance. Although other German princes despised him, they also understood Marin's embarrassing performance. Why? Anyone who gets a territory of 20,000 to 30,000 square kilometers will be extremely happy. However, Marin was more embarrassed and laughed foolishly in public. Seeing the contemptuous eyes from the surrounding princes, Marin was not annoyed, but gave everyone a friendly smile and said kindly, I'm sorry to make you laugh. I won't take the initiative to invade others, but I welcome others to invade me. Because, in this way, I can have a suitable excuse to expand my territory. After all, no one will complain about too much territory. Welcome others to invade me. Marin's confident words made the princes feel a chill behind their heads. Nimad, Marin did not take the initiative to attack others, but the more he was attacked, the larger the territory. Let's not provoke him. Frederick III was also angry. Yes, why did I provoke this villain for no reason? If I hadn't meddled in my sister's affairs, I wouldn't have suffered such huge losses. Not only did I have to cede land, but I also had to pay a compensation of 1 million. More importantly, Marin had looted Wittenberg before, and many wealthy families in Wittenberg were probably bankrupt. I don't know how long it would take to restore Wittenberg to its former prosperity. Joachim, I also regretted it. Why did I marry Denmark in the first place? If he hadn't married the Danish princess, the electorate of Brandenburg would not have been involved in the war caused by Denmark, and Stendal, a prosperous city on the west bank of the Elbe River, would not have been lost. King Hans of Denmark probably wanted to die at this time. He didn't lose the territory of 1 or 2 counties, but the territory of 4 duchies, and the territory of a larger duchy. The Duchy of Holstein, the Duchy of Schleswig and other areas of the Jutland Peninsula, together, cover an area of almost 40,000 square kilometers. Moreover, this is the area with the best climate in Denmark. Through these 2 wars, Denmark lost all its territory on the European continent, leaving only a few islands such as Zealand and the northernmost kingdom in Europe, the Kingdom of Norway. The Kingdom of Norway is indeed very large, with its homeland alone exceeding 200,000 square kilometers. However, that is useless. Most of the territory of the Kingdom of Norway is located north of 60 degrees north latitude. What is the concept of 60 degrees north latitude? In Asia at the same latitude, it is already an extremely cold place further north than the Greater Shingan Range. Harbin, the ice city of later generations, is only about 45 degrees north latitude. Of course, due to the North Atlantic warm current, Norway is not as cold as the Northeast in winter. However, don't expect there to be any high temperatures here in summer. Only a small number of areas south of 60 degrees north latitude can still engage in special agriculture. For example, some cold-resistant crops such as potatoes can be planted. As for grains, it is not impossible to grow them. But the key is that the current grain varieties in Europe are very poor. The core problem is that the growing period is too long. In Europe today, it is normal for rye to grow for more than half a year. Wheat varieties are even worse. They are planted in November of the first year and harvested in October of the second year. They need to grow for a whole year. This is not a problem in southern Europe with low latitudes, but it is fatal in places with high latitudes like Norway. Summer is short, and spring and autumn are also cold. If it is the wheat seeds that are planted in spring and harvested in summer in later generations, it may be possible to plant them. But now this kind of variety with a particularly long growth period, don't even think about planting it in Norway. Moreover, although Norway has an area of tens of thousands of square kilometers south of 60 degrees north latitude. But it is mainly mountainous terrain. If it is a plain, cut down the forest and make grassland, maybe you can develop animal husbandry. After all, wild grass and livestock do not necessarily need the high temperature in summer. Sheep wool is so thick that it can still withstand it. Moreover, although the winter in Norway is long, it is really not too cold. However, the rugged mountains in Norway also shattered the idea of developing animal husbandry on a large scale. Of course, another important bottleneck restricting the development of the Kingdom of Norway is the population problem. Norway has an area of more than 200,000 square kilometers, but it has only about 240,000 people. Calculated, it is equivalent to 1 person per square kilometer on average. What is the concept? 1 square kilometer is equivalent to 1,500 acres of land, 1,500 acres per capita. Of course, most of it is mountainous and useless. But to be honest, the tens of thousands of square kilometers of land south of 60 degrees north latitude in Norway can still be developed as long as it is well developed. Marin remembered a number. The total agricultural land in Norway in later generations was more than 10,000 square kilometers, of which grassland accounted for more than 6,300 square kilometers. These places should be within the tens of thousands of square kilometers south of 60 degrees north latitude in Norway. After all, although there are many mountains, there are still river valleys and coastal plains that can be used if you squeeze them. If those places are really used, they can still feed hundreds of thousands of people, with the current backward agricultural and animal husbandry technology. But the problem is that farming and animal husbandry require a large population. Just thinking about Norway, suddenly the Danish King Hans came to him with a bitter face. At this time, the emperor publicly announced that the order had ended long ago, and the parliamentarians could not refute it, so they acquiesced. Moreover, the meeting was almost over at this point. Next, it was time for the princes to talk to each other and make friends. Marin was a little confused about the Danish King Hans coming to him, but he soon knew the other party's intention. Hans did not want to take over the Danish nobles on the Jutland Peninsula, because that is a heavy burden for Denmark. You know, the northern part of the Jutland Peninsula with an area of more than 20,000 square kilometers that Denmark has newly ceded to Marin has a population of nearly 250,000, and there are also 600 or 700 nobles, all of whom are Danes. If these 600 or 700 nobles are brought back to Zealand, they may have to rely on the Danish court for support after losing their land. Because of their noble status, the cost is not low. This is too much of a burden for the Kingdom of Denmark, which has been defeated twice in a row and ceded land and paid compensation. So, Hans meant that he wanted Marin to accept these 600 or 700 Danish nobles and let them turn their allegiance to Marin. But Marin shook his head again and again. Why? This is a mine, you can't just accept it. Marin doesn't think there is anything wrong with the 250,000 civilian Danes. At most, use gentle means to slowly assimilate them. After all, those Danish civilians are uneducated, and they can promote German education themselves and be won over with financial subsidies. But the 600 or 700 Danish nobles are different. The families of these nobles have a systematic cultural heritage, the cultural heritage of the Danish language. This kind of cultural heritage may not be seen now. But once nationalism rises, these Danish cultural heritages will become the battle program for the Danes to resist and the cultural backbone of the Danish nation. Therefore, keeping these educated Danish nobles is definitely laying mines for yourself and your descendants. Look at the terrible Scottish referendum and Catalan referendum in later generations. Marin had long planned to assimilate all the Danes in Jutland into the German population, so he naturally didn't want those nobles with cultural heritage to stay. Getting them out was what Marin needed to do most. But Denmark really can't afford to support them. King Hans said sadly. He really had no choice. Denmark was now poor as hell, and its maritime trade had been destroyed by the Hanseatic League. How could he afford to support 600 or 700 noble families? Your Majesty, you can send these 600 or 700 families to the south of Norway to reclaim wasteland. As far as I know, although there are many mountains in the south of Norway, there are also many uncultivated plains and valleys. These nobles should be able to be settled. Marin suggested. But Norway is not suitable for farming. Hans said. Why should we farm? Isn't it better to raise sheep? Not only can it provide mutton, but also sheepskin and wool. 600 or 700 families cut down trees, free up plains and valleys, and rely on raising sheep. It seems that they can survive. Even, Your Majesty can collect trade taxes on wool and sheepskin. In order to get rid of this hot potato, Marin did not hesitate to give advice to his rival King Hans. Yes, this is a good idea. King Hans' eyes lit up. These days, the feudal nobles do not pay taxes for farming, but raising sheep involves the trade of wool and sheepskin. Parchment was very popular in Europe at this time. Once there is a trade, the king has the power to collect taxes, which is simply too beautiful. As for cutting down trees to damage the environment. Damn, that idiot said that. This guy who spread rumors and misled the people should be quickly tied to the stake and burned to death. But after a while, King Han's eyes dimmed again, and he said. But after these nobles left Jutland, they couldn't cut trees or raise sheep without serfs. Moreover, there are too few people in the Kingdom of Norway, and no one is assigned to them to work. Hans was right. According to the agreement, Hans had to take away all the Danish nobles and their families on Jutland, but he was not allowed to take the serfs. Without serfs, do you expect these nobles to produce? They will starve to death for you to see. Only those lower-class knight families who often participated in labor themselves would not starve to death. Moreover, the Kingdom of Norway was originally short of people. It was difficult to send these 600 or 700 nobles to southern Norway and give them some serfs. Hearing this, Marin gritted his teeth in order to get rid of those thunders and decided to bleed. How about this, Your Majesty? I allow each of those nobles to take 10 strong men and the families of those strong men away. Of course, it is best to follow the principle of voluntariness when taking people away. King Hans looked at Marin in surprise. Is this guy so kind? However, he immediately accepted Marin's gift. This is good for him. Marin is certainly not so kind. He did this to send away those plague gods, so that they would not leave any seeds of civilization and spirit on the Jutland Peninsula. There are a bunch of uneducated serfs left, and they are not easy to fool. At most, pay some money and let their children go to school to learn German for free. 100 years later, when those children who learn German grow up, who will still remember Denmark? I remember that the nobles of the Danish team all went to Norway to cut trees and raise sheep. Although Marin would lose thousands of strong men and 20,000 to 30,000 people, he did not regret it. Because this was to clear minds for the Jutland Peninsula in advance. Unlike other German regions, most of the people in the Jutland Peninsula are Danes. It is very difficult to assimilate these Danes. Especially those educated Danes, they are the leaders in the eyes of the common people. With their existence, the Danish culture will not be broken. Don't you see that the northern China was invaded by nomadic peoples several times, but it still survived tenaciously. Moreover, it assimilated foreigners. Why? Because of those literati. If the nomadic people killed all those literati and then taught the uneducated people foreign languages, after a few generations, those people would be Huized. However, those nomadic peoples themselves had no culture, so they had to use those local Chinese literati. The final result was that they were Sinicized. The literati did not die, and the culture did not die. Because there are always literati reminding the people, we are XX people. If the Scots can't speak Scottish anymore, and the Catalans can't speak Catalan anymore, will they still have the idea of splitting? Marin even thinks that the existence of dialects is unnecessary. Because the existence of dialects has caused regional differences and differences in identity. The existence of dialects not only causes communication difficulties. Moreover, people will be automatically divided into groups by dialects, causing cultural divisions. Even regional discrimination will be caused by dialects. The most profound impression of Marin in his previous life was when he met a Shanghai aunt in Shanghai, who seemed to be very arrogant and asked, "Alas, Shanghai people, where are you from?" When she heard that you were from another place, she showed contempt in her eyes. If everyone spoke the same Mandarin, there would be no difference in dialects and cultural differences, who could despise whom? The local accent is friendly, but it is easy to cause cultural differences and group divisions, and cause ideological divisions. The simplest example is the descendants of Chinese immigrants living abroad. Many of them, because they can't speak Chinese, have become the legendary banana people, yellow skin and white heart. They speak fluent English, French, German, but they can't speak Chinese. Although they have Chinese ancestry, you treat them as your own people, but they treat you as strange outsiders. For example, NBA star Jeremy Lin is sought after by many people, but he can't speak Chinese at all. He is a standard banana person. The Chinese he speaks on TV is extremely poor, and he learned it temporarily. If it weren't for the terrifying Chinese market of the NBA during Yao Ming's period, he might not be willing to learn Chinese. It is said that this is also what the NBA league asked him to do, in order to keep the huge Chinese market. Unfortunately, Jeremy Lin is not Yao Ming, and it is difficult for him to integrate into the Chinese circle, and he can't succeed Yao Ming and become the flagpole of the NBA in China. Except for some people who are easily fooled, most people don't buy it. Because he is a banana who can't even speak Chinese well. So, it's better to expel all the educated Danes on the Jutland Peninsula, leaving only those illiterate people, and then teach them German. Then, the Danes on the Jutland Peninsula will be Germanized. Anyway, they will be educated to become Danes with a German core. Of course, Germans and Danes are actually both Germanic people, but they don't speak the same language. Even the yellow people will become banana people with yellow skin and white heart because of language changes, let alone the Danes who are of the same race. As long as the German language is popularized well, these Danes on the Jutland Peninsula will be assimilated into Germans. Just like the Xianbei people back then, if you ask people with the surname Murong now, are they Xianbei or Han people? They are definitely Han people. It won't be that fast to promote the steam engine and carry out the Industrial Revolution, at least decades. By then, the protagonist will have the strength to sweep across Europe. Chapter 542, Jutland's Agricultural Potential and the Cossacks. In medieval Europe, intellectuals were mainly divided into two categories, nobles and clergy. Marin asked King Hans of Denmark to take away those nobles, which could only be regarded as solving half of the problem. For those literate Danish clergy, the problem has not been solved yet. However, this is not a difficult problem. Because Marin has the support of the Holy See, it is still very simple to transfer these Danish clergy on a large scale. For example, after the Archbishopric of Bremen moved to Stendal, many important clergy of the Archbishopric of Bremen would definitely be taken away. In this way, many clergy positions would be vacant in the former Archbishopric of Bremen. In this way, Marin can completely transfer all the educated Danish clergy in Jutland to the former Archbishopric of Bremen. Then, from the German region under his control, select German missionaries to preside over daily church affairs in Jutland. Of course, because German clergy do not speak Danish, it is difficult to communicate with the Danish people. Therefore, Marin will choose to select German missionaries who can speak Danish in the Duchy of Schleswig to be responsible for church affairs. The Duchy of Schleswig is a very special place. The south of this place is mainly inhabited by Germans, later assigned to Germany, and the north is mainly inhabited by Danes, later assigned to Denmark. Although located in the north and south, the Germans and Danes in the Duchy of Schleswig still have a lot of intersections. After all, they are in the same country. Therefore, many missionaries in the Duchy of Schleswig can speak German and Danish at the same time. Moreover, missionaries who can speak German and Danish at the same time account for more than half of the total number of missionaries in the Duchy of Schleswig, which is a considerable number. Of course, although they can speak two languages, missionaries in the Duchy of Schleswig will still choose their own national language as their mother tongue. The other language is just for the convenience of communicating with people. When writing, German missionaries will still choose German, while Danish missionaries will still choose Danish. Therefore, there is no need to worry that the German missionaries who can speak Danish will help the Danes pass on their culture when they are brought to the Danish area of Jutland. As for those Danish missionaries, Marin decided to use the authorization given by the Holy See to transfer them all to the German area, even if they are kept for nothing. Then, the church affairs in the Danish area of Jutland Peninsula will be taken over by the German missionaries who can speak Danish in the Principality of Schleswig. Then, Marin will establish many primary schools among the Danes in the name of the church to teach local children to learn German and write German. At the same time, all official documents and books in Jutland are in German. As for Danish, Marin does not prohibit it, but does not allow it to be used in writing, and treats it as a dialect without text. However, the Danes who do not speak German can only be serfs forever, and will not get the opportunity to change their destiny. At the same time, Marin will also choose to immigrate to Jutland Peninsula and immigrate a large number of German refugees to Jutland Peninsula. Although the Jutland Peninsula is not large in area, it has a relatively flat terrain, and there is a lot of room for development in both planting and animal husbandry. In later generations, Denmark is one of the most developed agricultural countries in Europe, known as the European food cupboard. Whether it is grain production or meat production, it ranks high in Europe. Moreover, Denmark's pork exports rank first in the world, and its per capita wheat production is close to 1 ton. Denmark has a population of more than 5 million, while China only has more than 90 kilograms. Of course, China's staple food is rice, which is not easy to compare. However, this also shows the development of Danish agriculture in later generations. Denmark's development of agriculture certainly has its high-tech components, but the most important thing is that Denmark has a lot of land available for agriculture. In later generations, Denmark has a land area of 43,000 square kilometers, excluding the Faroe Islands, but there are 29,000 square kilometers of arable land, NEMA, accounting for 67% of the land area. What is the proportion of China? Less than 1/10. Moreover, although China has a lot of arable land in later generations, many of the arable lands are barren. The land in the north, especially the land in the northwest, is seriously short of water. Denmark is not short of water at all. Except that the climate is a little cooler, there is no problem. Therefore, the Danes in later generations can create miracles in agriculture. Of course, because of the time traveler Marin, it is difficult for Denmark in later generations to create miracles. Because the Jutland Peninsula with the largest land area in Denmark was snatched by Marin. Later, it was Marin who developed agriculture on the Jutland Peninsula. Marin knew that the land on the Jutland Peninsula was fertile and flat, and there was a lot of arable land, at least more than half. The Jutland Peninsula, including the Duchy of Schleswig, is about 30,000 square kilometers. If half of the arable land is calculated, there are 15,000 square kilometers. Converted into acres, it is 3.7 million acres, which is 1.85 million uglums, or 22.46 million acres. Of course, this is an ideal situation. Moreover, it is the late Middle Ages, and agriculture is purely manual. There are not so many people to cultivate so much land. Take the newly acquired Jutland Peninsula, which covers an area of more than 20,000 square kilometers. There are only 250,000 Danes and tens of thousands of strong laborers. A family of 5 can cultivate 100 mu of land at most. 250,000 people can cultivate 5 million mu of land at most. However, these 250,000 people are not all farmers. There are also many fishermen and people from other industries. Therefore, the biggest problem now is the serious shortage of population. To make good use of the more than 20 million mu of land, at least 200,000 families of 5 are needed, which means more than 1 million people. Moreover, these are all agricultural populations. Therefore, Marin's plan is, since there is a shortage of people, let's immigrate Germans from poor places in Germany. By then, the German population will have an advantage, so why worry about the Danes turning over the waves? Besides, Marin also plans to encourage Germans and Danes to intermarry. They are all Germanic people, and there is not much difference except language and customs. With the intermarriage and the majority of Germans, it would take less than a few decades for this place to be assimilated. If more than half of the land on the Jutland Peninsula is really to be developed into farmland and pastures, Marin will have cramps in his hands just collecting rent. Of course, for military purposes, Marin intends to divide the usable half of the 30,000 square kilometers of land on the Jutland Peninsula into 2 major parts, arable land and pastures. Arable land requires too much labor, and Marin intends to reclaim half of it, mainly the fertile land along the river and the area that is convenient for irrigation, into arable land. The other half of the area not close to rivers and lakes will be opened up as pastures, all planted with alfalfa, and raised fine wool sheep, as well as cattle and horses. Of course, it is also possible to develop Denmark's strong breeding industry in later generations, pig farming. By then, the fertile Jutland Peninsula will become Marin's granary and meat warehouse. At the same time, a large number of war horses and cheese products can be supplied. The cows are naturally Dutch white cows, and for war horses, Marin chooses Eastern European Mongolian horses, which are later called Don horses. Although this kind of Cossack cavalry mount is not as good as the precious horse breeds such as Arabian horses, it is better in endurance and roughage. Just put it on the grass to eat grass, and it can be fed. Only when it is very tired, such as after a long-distance run with people, it is necessary to add some fine feed. Unlike European war horses, it usually needs to be fed. 3 or 5 horses are okay, but if there are tens of thousands of horses, the cost is simply amazing. Therefore, in European history, the scale of cavalry has never been large. But the poor Tsarist Russia can often dispatch tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Cossack cavalry to sweep across the 4 directions. During World War I, Tsarist Russia even dispatched millions of Cossack cavalry. However, facing the German machine gun array, it did not get any good results. However, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the Tsars who could dispatch tens of thousands of Cossack cavalry at will, known as the European steamroller, made the whole of Europe tremble a little. Therefore, Marin decided to build more settlements similar to Cossack villages in the pastoral areas outside the cultivated land on the Jutland Peninsula. Then, Marin would select some young men who liked to ride horses and have tough personalities from the German youth to join these villages. Marin would allocate pastures to them, but they had to pay a small amount of taxes and fight for Marin unconditionally. Usually, these guys ride Eastern European Mongolian horses to graze on the pastures of the Jutland Peninsula. When they are free, Marin will arrange for the village chief to organize these guys to practice wrestling, horse fighting and horseback archery. Their village chief is equivalent to the captain of the cavalry company under Marin. Once the war breaks out, the village chief will transform into the captain of the cavalry company and lead the young and strong people in the village to fight for Marin. This model is somewhat similar to the 8 banners system of the Qing dynasty, entering as a civilian, and going out as a soldier. In this way, Marin only needs to pay some grassland to obtain a large number of brave cavalry, which is absolutely cost-effective. Moreover, they are not exempt from taxes. They still have to pay 10% of taxes every year. Only in war years will there be tax exemption. Because the village chief often organizes young and strong people to practice martial arts and tactics, so in wartime, the combat effectiveness of these cavalrymen will not be very bad. Strictly speaking, their village is a half barracks. And Marin does not need to spend much money to recruit them in wartime, at most he can subsidize them with some food and feed for war horses. There is no need to pay them, their land is the salary. In this way, Marin does not need to spend money to support them at ordinary times, but after the war begins, he can recruit a large number of excellent cavalrymen. The more such villages there are, the more cavalry Marin has. Marin does not ask to have hundreds of thousands of Cossacks like the Tsar. He is satisfied as long as he can pull out 10,000 or 20,000 Cossack cavalrymen in wartime. As for the name of the village, Marin was too lazy to think about it, and directly copied it, called Cossack Village. The cavalry that came out is also called Cossack. Anyway, now, the genuine Cossacks have not appeared yet. If you make it yourself first, it will be the genuine one. Damn, when there are more Cossack villages under your command, who dares to disobey? I will send tens of thousands of Cossack cavalry to smash and loot your house. Chapter 543, Adjustment of Relations with Sweden. After the problem of Jutland Peninsula was solved, the account between Marin and Denmark was settled. As for the compensation of 500,000 gold coins, it will take 5 years to repay. Moreover, Marin did not intend to force Denmark too much. When necessary, Marin can also relax the repayment time. Why is Marin so tolerant of Denmark? And allow the other party to take many people away from Jutland Peninsula? In addition to sending away the educated Danes, Marin has other considerations. What are the considerations? It is because Marin began to guard against Sweden. Marin is familiar with history. He knows that without his intervention, Denmark will also decline. Sweden, on the other hand, rose to become the overlord of Northern Europe, and suddenly rose in the 30 Years' War more than 100 years later, and also killed into the German region. After the end of the 30 Years' War, in 1648, the newly rising Sweden actually obtained the Archbishopric of Bremen, the Bishopric of Verden and the Duchy of Pomerania as trophies. You know, in history, Sweden fought with Denmark for decades before finally winning independence. Now, due to Marin's intervention, Sweden has gained independence ahead of schedule. Denmark, on the other hand, was crippled by Marin. Without Denmark's oppression, Marin was worried that Sweden would rise ahead of schedule and become the overlord of Northern Europe. Northern Europe is so small, and when Sweden becomes strong, it is easy to infringe on Marin's interests. Therefore, from the moment the contract was signed, Marin's mind changed dramatically. Now, Marin has the idea of restricting Sweden. Sweden during the entire period did not only own Sweden, but also included the Finnish region. Moreover, in terms of population, Sweden's population also exceeds that of Denmark. The Kingdom of Sweden, including the Finnish region, currently has about 850,000 people, and its land area is also very large, including the vast areas south of the Arctic Circle in Sweden and Finland in later generations. After losing the Jutland Peninsula, Denmark only has 350,000 people in the mainland and 240,000 people in Norway, which adds up to less than 600,000 people. Among them, Sweden's most essential southern region has always been controlled by the Danes in history. Originally in history, it was not until after the 30 Years' War that Sweden completely rose and took back the southern part of Sweden. Before, southern Sweden was suitable for agricultural areas and was controlled by Denmark for a long time. But because of Marin's intervention, Denmark has lost the southern part of Sweden early and began to decline ahead of time. Sweden, on the other hand, gained independence ahead of time and is likely to rise ahead of time. Marin now regrets developing the French copper mine early. Even if Sweden only gets half of the benefits, it will make Sweden develop rapidly. At least, the income from the French copper mine is enough for Sweden to form a strong army. What can Sweden do after it becomes strong? Of course, it has to expand. To the east is the fierce Mausi, and to the south are Poland and Lithuania, which have not yet declined. No one is easy to mess with. Then, the most realistic expansion target is Denmark, which has been crippled. Whether it is the Kingdom of Norway connected to Sweden or Zealand Island, Denmark's native island, it seems to be a good expansion target. Moreover, the Kingdom of Sweden is different from Marin. Marin is a German prince and is subject to many constraints and cannot go all out. As for Sweden, because it is located in northern Europe, others are out of reach of it. If it is willful and messes with Norway, others can't interfere. Even if it takes over Zealand, the Danish mainland, others can't reach it. Unless you reach out to the Jutland Peninsula, the countries on the land have the ability to interfere. But the Jutland Peninsula is Marin's territory, and the Swedes will not commit suicide. But the problem is that Marin is now Sweden's ally. If Sweden expands and attacks Denmark, Marin can not only not oppose it, but may have to cooperate. Therefore, Marin plans to find an opportunity to dissolve the four-party alliance formed before, including himself, Lübeck, Hamburg and Sweden. In this way, he will not become Sweden's protector. And Denmark has no scruples if it wants to move Sweden. Although Denmark was crippled by itself, its strength is still there. At least, most of the Swedish army was captured, not killed. As long as it is redeemed, it is still very combat effective. Sweden, at most, has more than 10,000 soldiers. Facing Denmark's more than 10,000 veterans and nearly 20,000 Swiss-trained soldiers, it is at a disadvantage. Of course, because of the war reparations, Denmark cannot afford to support so many troops for a long time, and it is good to be able to maintain 10,000 people. Therefore, in the short term, Sweden will definitely have the upper hand. But as long as Denmark can catch its breath, it can still suppress Sweden for a while. What's more, Denmark has an ally, the electorate of Brandenburg. Although Joachim I was somewhat dissatisfied with being dragged into the water by his father-in-law, if a war between Denmark and Sweden really happened, the electorate of Brandenburg would have a great chance of sending troops to help Denmark, and the chances of winning were very high. However, the premise of all this is that Marin doesn't care about Sweden. Marin certainly doesn't want to care about Sweden. He joined Sweden before to fight Denmark. Now that Denmark has been hit hard, who the hell wants to help the young lion of Sweden? Therefore, Marin plans to dissolve this four-party alliance with a strong military purpose in the name of maintaining peace after returning. Of course, Marin actually just wants to kick Sweden out, and doesn't want to break up with Lübeck and Hamburg. Because the imperial cities led by Lübeck and Hamburg are also very important political resources, and they are useless. Therefore, after dissolving the quadrilateral alliance, Marin will re-sign a commercial and political alliance with Lübeck and Hamburg in the name of commercial needs to continue the alliance. However, there is no place for Sweden in this alliance. In this way, when Denmark and Sweden tear each other apart in the future, Marin can sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Even, depending on who is stronger, he can secretly help the weaker party. In the future, Marin will be a troublemaker in Northern Europe, who is specifically responsible for making trouble for Denmark and Sweden. If Denmark is at a disadvantage, Marin will support Denmark. If Sweden is at a disadvantage, Marin will support Sweden. In short, let these two countries fight endlessly until the end of time, and don't tell the winner. Moreover, Marin thinks that Sweden is taking too much advantage now. It would be best if the Danes occupied southern Sweden and Gotland Island, so that they would have the capital to continue to compete with Sweden. Otherwise, if Sweden develops, it will be easy to suppress Denmark steadily. Before sending Danish King Hans away, Marin quietly told Hans his plan to remain neutral between Denmark and Sweden. King Hans was shocked and then overjoyed. This means that once Denmark gets out of the difficulties of paying compensation, it can find a way to regain control of southern Sweden. By controlling the fertile areas in southern Sweden, the loss of the Jutland Peninsula can be completely compensated. You know, southern Sweden is much larger than mainland Denmark. Moreover, it is only separated from Copenhagen by the Øresund Strait, which is easier to manage and more convenient to manage than Norway. Moreover, if the Danes control southern Sweden, it means that the Swedes have lost their warm and fertile land. This relationship of gain and loss will inevitably affect Sweden's development. In this way, it will not be so easy for the Swedes to rise. Chapter 544 Non-Aggression Treaty. After the signing of this contract, Marin's war for hegemony in Europe will come to an end. Of course, there may be a war with the Principality of Guedes over West Frisia and Guedes' surrender to France. However, Marin did not fight a big war, but planned to recuperate. Of course, this does not mean that Marin will stop expanding. Instead, Marin now needs to integrate the territories he has obtained and develop them. In addition, even if Marin wants to expand now, there is no excuse to provoke a war. Unless it is strong enough to sweep across Europe, war must require an excuse. Otherwise, no matter how strong you are, you will face a group fight. In history, when the Habsburg dynasty was at its strongest, it owned both the Holy Roman Empire in Spain and defeated France. But so what? You are strong, right? Most of the princes of Germany united against you, and even France joined in. Even France, knowing that it could not beat Charles V, was willing to form an alliance with the pagan Ottoman Turkey and gather all the power of Europe to fight you. Therefore, Charles V failed to accomplish the great cause of unifying Germany. Marin's current strength can only be said to be invincible in single combat, but it has not been able to fight against the whole of Germany. Therefore, he needs time for integration and development. As long as he develops for a few years or more, the newly added territory will gradually prosper, bringing more wealth and young people. By then, Marin can increase his troops and get 70,000 to 80,000 regular elite troops, or even 100,000 troops. By then, even in the face of a group fight, Marin will be fearless. Moreover, Marin knew very well that Martin Luther would launch a religious reform in a dozen years. Then, it would sweep across northern Germany. Many northern princes accepted Protestantism, including two important secular electors, the Elector of Saxony and the Elector of Brandenburg. In fact, the real mastermind behind the religious reform was the Elector of Saxony, Frederick III. Martin Luther used the Electorate of Saxony as his base camp, quickly infiltrated the Archbishopric of Magdeburg next to the Electorate of Saxony, and then quickly spread to the surrounding areas, sweeping across northern Germany. The two archbishoprics of Germany, which have very special status, the Archbishopric of Magdeburg and the Archbishopric of Bremen, have all become Protestant areas. This has a great impact on the influence of Catholicism in Germany, because the Archbishopric of Magdeburg and the Archbishopric of Bremen are the only two archbishoprics in Germany that are not electors. The leaders of other bishoprics are only bishops, not archbishops. As long as the Reformation is launched, with the relationship between Marin and the Holy See, it is entirely possible to raise the banner of protecting religion and cooperate with the Catholic group in southern Germany to encircle and suppress Protestant countries. Of course, after the encirclement and suppression, the territory will naturally be theirs. As for the noble bloodline, go to hell. Those princes who betrayed Catholicism must be excommunicated. Who cares about the interests of a prince who betrayed Catholicism? At that time, as long as I move faster, it will not be a problem to take half of Germany. The only question is, can my father-in-law live to that time? Also, whether the next pope is close to me. So, Marin plans to start contacting Leo X in advance when the time is right. Why Leo X, not other cardinals? That's because the fuse that triggered the Reformation, the indulgence, was invented by this man. With him, the Reformation can be detonated. If a virtuous pope is replaced, how can Marin fish in troubled waters in the conflict of the Reformation? Leo X is still a young man now, and Marin's relationship with him is not considered high. Then introduce him to his father-in-law and train him as a successor. At that time, I don't say that this guy will support me like my father-in-law, but it will definitely be no problem to favor me. At least, I can still get some support by sending troops to help suppress Protestantism and obtain the legitimate rule of those defeated Protestant countries. Of course, there are still 12 years before the Reformation. Marin still needs to be low-key now. He not only needs to develop his strength, but also needs to let other princes let down their guard against him, so as not to become the target of public criticism. For this reason, Marin now needs to work hard to play the role of peace dove to reassure the princes. Therefore, Marin decided to introduce a measure from later generations signing the non-aggression treaty. In fact, in later generations, the non-aggression treaty is a joke. The most representative one is the Soviet-German non-aggression treaty. But everyone knows what the final result was. Therefore, this kind of treaty is a complete joke in later generations. After World War II, no one signed the non-aggression treaty again. Even if a peace treaty is signed, it will not be called this name. However, in the early 16th century, this kind of treaty was still very binding and credible. Why? Because the current European monarchs are not as shameless as those in the 20th century. The current European monarchs still have some shame. Of course, except for someone who came from later generations. So, this kind of treaty, at least on the surface, is very bluffing. After signing, everyone may be more assured of Marin. So, Marin sincerely found the princes of neighboring countries such as the Bishop of Utrecht, the Bishop of Verden, the Duke of Lüneburg, the Duke of Clever, the Archbishop of Cologne, etc. When Marin took the initiative to propose let's sign a non-aggression treaty, they were all confused. However, no one refused. Why? Because Marin's military strength is obviously stronger than any neighboring country. If he doesn't beat others, others will be happy, so how dare they provoke him? Therefore, this non-aggression treaty, at least from the perspective of the peace treaty, is beneficial to these principalities whose military strength is weaker than Marin. Of course, I won't mention someone tearing up the contract. Since Marin took the initiative to ask for peace, these princes will naturally not refuse. So, under the witness of everyone, Marin and all the neighboring princes, except the absent Duke of Guise, Charles II, signed the non-aggression treaty. Of course, Marin was also very happy that Charles II didn't come. Otherwise, if he signed the non-aggression treaty with the Principality of Guise and then used force against it, he would have no face. Moreover, Marin was also very confused. Even if Charles II, Duke of Guise, was not feeling well, it would not be difficult to send a representative, right? At least, he could defend himself in the face of George's accusations. How could he know that Charles II did send a minister, but the minister fell ill halfway, and Charles II had no time to change the representative? Then, the Principality of Guise had no representative to attend the imperial conference. Seeing that Marin solemnly signed the non-aggression treaty with neighboring countries, the German princes who had not experienced the human dangers applauded. At least, Marin showed his attitude of not wanting to cause trouble. In this way, everyone was not so worried that Marin would take the initiative to invade other countries. After the signing of the non-aggression treaty, Marin told the princes that he would develop overseas, which was even more reassuring. Marin was going to make trouble overseas, anyway, it would not harm their interests. Moreover, Marin focused his attention overseas, and the German princes were more relieved. At this time, Marin looked exactly like the eagle with an olive branch in its mouth in the painting that satirized U.S. President Wilson during World War I, that is, the eagle dressed as a dove of peace with an olive branch in its mouth symbolizing peace. Chapter 545 Timber Trade with Denmark. While Marin was busy signing the non-aggression treaty with his neighbors, King Hans of Denmark, who was supposed to leave, did not leave, but went to find his brother-in-law, Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony. Seeing this brother-in-law who caused him to lose a large area of territory and needed to pay $1 million in compensation, Frederick III, who had always been well-educated, almost lost control of his emotions and sent someone to beat King Hans. However, Frederick III still endured it. After all, a beating would not solve the problem, and it would also lose an in-law ally. King Hans told Frederick III about his doubts. He was suspicious of Marin's sudden show of goodwill, and always suspected that the cunning Marin had some conspiracy. But Frederick III was much smarter than him. After hearing these words, he just thought about it and understood. Don't worry, brother-in-law, this is a good thing. This shows that Marin, the little fox, is worried about Sweden. Worried about Sweden? What do you mean? Frederick III rolled his eyes. No wonder you always lose the war, with this IQ, you need to recharge. He patiently explained. After these two wars, Denmark is considered weak. But after Sweden gained independence, both the land area and the population exceeded Denmark. So, I guess that kid Marin should be worried that Sweden will expand and destroy Denmark. Will he worry about Denmark being destroyed? King Hans was a little curious. Frederick III rolled his eyes and said, "Of course, if Sweden destroys Denmark, its strength will be similar to that of the Kalmar Union before losing Sweden, and it can be regarded as a powerful country. Marin is obviously worried that the powerful Sweden will ask for the Jutland Peninsula after annexing Denmark." "Oh, so he supports me now?" King Hans said in a daze. "No, he won't fully support you. He supports you now, but he's afraid that you will be destroyed by Sweden. If you become strong and have the momentum to destroy Sweden, he will definitely turn to support Sweden." Frederick III must have said. As one of the best politicians in Europe, he sees it much more clearly than King Hans. King Hans is not a stupid person. He thought about it and understood Marin's sinister intentions. However, for now, the best choice for Denmark is to accept Marin's kindness. So, before leaving Worms, Danish King Hans found Marin and hoped to discuss a business with Marin. "What? You said you want to sell me wood?" Marin looked at King Hans in surprise. In fact, this idea was given to Hans by Frederick III. He knew that King Hans planned to develop the coastal forests in southern Norway. Because these forests are close to the sea, the large amount of wood cut down can be sold as a commodity. After all, due to the excessive development efforts in Western Europe, good wood is becoming less and less. And the forests in Norway are not highly developed because of the small population and less felling. Now, taking advantage of the opportunity to develop the southern coast of Norway, Denmark simply sold a handful of wood to get some money to pay off debts and develop the local area. According to ancient European law, forests and minerals are the property of the king. Then, the cut wood is naturally Hans's. If these woods are sold, they can also make a lot of money. Although Hans can also ask Hansa merchants in Lübeck and Hamburg to buy them, Frederick III believes that the Hansa merchants in Lübeck and Hamburg are too shrewd and cunning, and they will definitely lower the price and will not give Hans an advantage. But Marin is different. Marin now needs to support Denmark to fight against the rise of Sweden. Therefore, if Marin sells wood to Marin, he must be relatively lighter than the merchants in Lübeck and Hamburg. As expected by Frederick III, Marin thinks that buying wood from southern Norway seems to be a good idea. Although the Norwegian region is at a high latitude, due to the influence of the North Atlantic warm current, there are still many broadleaf trees, such as oak, in the area south of 60 degrees north latitude. The Vikings' canoes were made from the tall and straight oak trees in the area. They were directly carved into dragonhead canoes and roamed along the coast of Western Europe. Therefore, if southern Norway is seriously developed, there is no shortage of oak. Moreover, there are a lot of local pine trees. Pine is an important wood for furniture and can also be used to make decks and masts. Therefore, if the forests in southern Norway are cut down seriously, they can be sold for a lot of money. In the past, Denmark occupied the Øresund Strait, an important transportation route from the North Sea to the Baltic Sea, and vigorously developed maritime trade. Naturally, it was not short of money, so it did not need to cut down trees to sell money. However, now that Denmark's fleet is gone, the Øresund Strait has also been occupied by Lübeck and Hamburg, and the most important source of maritime income has been lost. In this case, cutting down trees and selling wood is really a good way to make money. But Marin is now in short of wood. Let's not talk about anything else. Just talking about shipbuilding, a lot of oak is needed, and pine wood can also be asked for. Even if there is no shipbuilding, domestic construction also requires a lot of wood. Although, after Marin occupied North America, he could cut wood from North America for free. But the problem is, cutting wood in North America is free, but shipping wood back to Europe is costly. If it is shipbuilding, you can directly build a shipyard in North America, using local materials, which can greatly reduce the cost. However, if a large number of furniture is needed in national construction, you can't also ship it back from North America, right? This round trip takes several months, and the transportation cost is no lower than buying wood from Norway. Moreover, southern Norway and Jutland Peninsula are across the sea, and the distance is very close, so the freight cost is of course low. In the future, Marin will definitely need a lot of wood to develop Jutland Peninsula. But Jutland Peninsula has low forest coverage, and good wood must have been cut down long ago, not as much as Norway in the north. Therefore, importing wood from Norway to build houses and make furniture is a very good choice. Of course, when it comes to shipbuilding, it is definitely better to choose to build a shipyard on the spot in North America, use local wood, and build a large number of ships. Especially those keel woods that are dozens of meters long are very difficult to move. It is better to lay the keel on the spot, and then match it with ribs and other woods. Moreover, Denmark's cutting and selling of trees this time is not for a long time, but because of the need to develop the forest. When southern Norway is developed, they may not continue to cut trees and sell them. Anyway, they have to support Denmark in the confrontation with Sweden, so Marin agreed to the request to trade timber with Denmark and agreed to send people to build a warehouse dock in southern Norway, which is about the area of Kristiansand in the future, specifically for purchasing timber cut down in Norway. The reason why the dock was built here is because Marin remembered that Kristiansand seemed to be a pirate base and shipbuilding base for Denmark in the future. It was mentioned in the history books of the previous life that in 1685, the Danish king authorized 69 captains in Kristiansand to allow them to rob merchant ships of the then hostile Britain and Sweden. Since then, Kristiansand has become a famous pirate and shipbuilding base in Denmark. Marin is worried that the Danes will go the old way and develop Kristiansand into a pirate base and shipbuilding base as in history. The Danes were beaten so badly by him, who would they plunder if they were to become pirates in the future? It would definitely be him. So, Marin simply built a cargo station and dock in Kristiansand to buy up the fine timber from Norway, especially for shipbuilding. Even if he couldn't use it, he could sell it to others. Anyway, he didn't want to keep it for Denmark, lest they start privateering again and affect his maritime trade. Moreover, taking this opportunity, Marin plans to establish a bridgehead base in Kristiansand, and even plans to build a coastal castle. If the Danes are not honest, Marin can also use Kristiansand as a landing springboard to transport troops to land in Norway and teach the Danes a lesson. Anyway, this timber trade can be regarded as a win-win situation. Denmark obtained the urgently needed funds, and Marin obtained the needed timber. Even if it is not needed, it will not be a waste. Because, these days, the demand for timber in Europe is huge. Among the trade goods of the Hanseatic League, timber is one of the important commodities. Marin purchased the timber cut down by the Danes in Norway. Even if he did not need it, mainly oak, even if he had enough, he could sell it to others and it would not be a waste. Chapter 546 Your Majesty, do you want second-hand weapons and armor? When a group of princes gathered in Worms to hold the Heroes' Conference, the war in Switzerland did not stop at all. After discussing the timber trade with King Hans of Denmark, Marin received intelligence from Switzerland sent by Kohler that night. The 10,000 troops of the Habsburg family, led by Frundsberg, Marin's former general, were unstoppable in the Swiss region with empty troops. Frundsberg led the army and not only quickly captured the Habsburg family's dragon-rising place Aargau, but also took advantage of the situation to capture the western half of Zurich, the largest canton in Switzerland. Even, it seemed that the city of Zurich was about to be conquered. At the same time, Frundsberg also divided his troops to the south to attack Lucerne, south of Aargau. It is said that Frundsberg also planned to send troops to attack Bern, which is no less than the canton of Zurich. Unfortunately, his troops were not enough. After all, Maximilian I only gave him 10,000 people. Switzerland has many mountainous terrains, and there are many fortresses built on the mountains. To sweep across Switzerland, not only do you have to overcome the undulating terrain, but you also need to conquer these fortresses. Frundsberg has followed Marin for a long time, is familiar with Marin's style, and highly respects Marin's tactics and methods. Therefore, although he was sent to serve the emperor, Frundsberg never stopped studying and imitating Marin's novel tactics. For example, this time, Frundsberg specially brought most of Austria's artillery and ammunition. As for what to do with artillery, naturally, it is to imitate Marin's tactics and bombard the city gates. Moreover, the Swiss region did not switch to iron gates like Denmark and Saxony, because the Swiss never thought that their homeland would be attacked. In addition, this is a mountainous area, and the news is relatively closed. Therefore, taking advantage of the Swiss's lack of news and the opportunity to replace the city gates before they had time, Frundsberg learned Marin's tactics and formed a large-scale artillery unit and a professional demolition team to deal with the Swiss oak city gates and fortress gates. In this way, relying on advanced tactics and the weakness of the Swiss's lack of manpower, Frundsberg led his troops to sweep across northern Switzerland. When Kohler's intelligence officers sent the message, Frundsberg was about to capture the city of Zurich. In fact, when Marin received this information, Zurich had already been conquered. But Marin knew very well that this was not the end, but just the beginning. Why? Because the Swiss are not so easy to conquer. In addition, the Habsburg family also took advantage of Switzerland's lack of manpower. Not to mention the 18,000 Swiss mercenaries captured by Marin, there are more than 10,000 mercenaries in France and the Duchy of Geddes. The Swiss mercenaries captured by Marin may not have the opportunity to return to their country to participate in the war against the Habsburgs, because Marin has decided to sell them to the emperor. However, the more than 10,000 Swiss mercenaries hired by France and the Duchy of Geddes will definitely return to their country to fight against the occupation of the Habsburgs. They are not scattered soldiers or guerrillas, but a well-organized and super-powerful regular army. According to the intelligence sent by Marin's spies in the Principality of Guedes, the Sieg Mercenary Corps led by the head of the Sieg Mercenary Corps and several other Swiss mercenary corps that had fought for the Principality of Guedes before have packed up and are ready to return home to participate in the war. Including the thousands of people in France, if they all go back, there will be more than 12,000 elite troops. Moreover, France will definitely provide them with assembly points and logistical supplies. Because the French never want the Habsburg family to control the entire Switzerland. Otherwise, once this happens, the French will never be able to recruit strong Swiss mercenaries from Switzerland under the control of the Habsburg family. Marin concluded that the French will definitely make great efforts to support those Swiss mercenaries this time and hope that they will defeat the Habsburg family's army. Therefore, the current army of the Habsburg family is obviously not enough to fight against the Swiss mercenaries who have returned home. Even if double the army is used, it may not be victorious. Therefore, Marin concluded that Maximilian I would definitely expand the army. At least, he had to add another 10,000 troops to withstand the Swiss counterattack. After sending King Hans away, Marin took the initiative to visit Emperor Maximilian I, who was still in Worms. Of course, Marin was not only here to remind the emperor, he also had a very important task, to sell arms. No, it should be said that it was to sell weapons and armor. These days, most military equipment is still cold weapons, without fire. Therefore, it is more appropriate to call military equipment weapons and armor. Marin won the war this time and captured so many prisoners. Naturally, he would not be polite. It goes without saying that he would strip the prisoners of their weapons and armor. Although a peace agreement was reached with Brandenburg and Saxony, as long as the other party paid a ransom of 1 million gold coins each, it was only enough to redeem people. As for war horses and weapons and armor, they were naturally not included in the redemption. Of course, the two electoral states were not short of weapons and armor. Especially for Saxony, it is not difficult to equip the soldiers again. However, the electorate of Brandenburg is relatively poor, and it is a bit difficult to get another set. Fortunately, Marin reduced the ransom by half. Otherwise, Joachim I could not even pay the ransom. Saxony and Brandenburg are both traditional principalities that advocate plate armor knights. Therefore, they have a lot of plate armor knights. In the last decisive battle, the electorate of Brandenburg dispatched more than 3,000 plate armor knights. And the electorate of Saxony has more than 4,000. Although Frederick III eventually fled with hundreds of Saxon knights, in order to travel light and escape conveniently, those hundreds of Saxon knights took off their plate armor and horse armor, and they were eventually picked up by the pursuers sent by Marin. Therefore, in that decisive battle, Marin seized 7,000 sets of plate armor and horse armor alone. As for the rest of the weapons, there were piles of them. Marin was not very happy for his army to use these backward weapons and armor, but his unwillingness did not mean that others were unwilling. For example, Austria would definitely be interested. You know, in history, Maximilian I was known as the Last Knight, and he also invented the famous and most advanced plate armor, Maximilian armor. Therefore, this knight emperor would definitely be very interested in those plate armor and horse armor. Marin went to His Majesty the Emperor this time not only to tip off, but also to promote second-hand weapons and armor. After all, the war is imminent, and the Habsburg family must need to expand its army. People are easier to recruit, but weapons and armor may not be in place all at once. Although Marin's second-hand weapons and armor, such as plate armor, are not as advanced and easy to use as the Maximilian armor designed by Maximilian I himself, they are also popular goods seized from the two electoral states, and they can still be used. The most important thing is that you can use it right away. You know, the war is imminent, but there is no time for Maximilian I to order the royal arsenal in Innsbruck to produce enough Maximilian armor. Therefore, the second-hand plate armor delivered by Marin is the best choice. After all, the Swiss are good at using spears, and the movers are not afraid of spears. Although there are also Swiss mercenaries who use war hammer specifically to deal with plate armor. However, they are a minority after all. In addition, the warriors wearing plate armor are not stupid enough to stand there and let you hit them. They will definitely fight back. When the number of warriors wearing plate armor reaches a certain level, the Swiss spearmen will also feel very difficult. Arriving at the emperor's temporary residence, Marin met the emperor with ease. When Maximilian I learned of Marin's intelligence, he was not too surprised. Obviously, he had also received relevant intelligence. Just as Marin thought, Maximilian I also felt that the troops were not enough and decided to expand the army by tens of thousands. However, the source of weapons and armor has indeed become the emperor's concern. The war is imminent, and there is no time to produce weapons and armor. Weapons are easy to say, such as a spear, which is nothing more than a spearhead in front of a wooden stick, which costs less iron and has a short working time. Plate armor is different. It takes a skilled craftsman a long time to make it, and the production efficiency is not high, otherwise it would not be so expensive. It is unlikely to mass produce quickly. In fact, what Maximilian I wanted most was to let the army under Marin help him fight. The combat effectiveness of Marin's army is there. As long as Marin's army is used, victory is certain. But where is Marin willing? Not to mention that Marin was unwilling to jump into the Swiss quagmire of war. Marin himself wanted to use the Swiss quagmire to hold back the Habsburg family, and it was even less likely that he would be willing to help. As for the excuse, wasn't it obvious that the princes oppressed Marin at the imperial conference? What the princes were most worried about was that Marin would become Maximilian I's thug. If Marin hadn't vowed that he would not become the emperor's thug to unify Germany, this level would be very difficult to pass. If Marin turned around and helped the emperor to fight Switzerland, wouldn't it be obvious that he was playing with the princes? Therefore, Marin had sufficient reasons to refuse to send troops to fight for the emperor. Maximilian I had no choice about this. After all, he also knew that if Marin really agreed to help him fight, maybe Marin himself would be beaten up in a group. Just when Maximilian I was a little worried, Marin suddenly said, "Your Majesty, do you want second-hand weapons and armor?" Double 11, it's obviously Singles' Day, a sad day. Why do you say you want to be so happy? What's there to be happy about? Perverted businessmen, just looking for excuses to deceive people. Chapter 547, The strength of the Ged people was greatly lost. Second-hand weapons and armor. Maximilian I did not react at once. Of course, this time I defeated the Bossa coalition and stripped 7,000 sets of plate armor and horse armor from the two armies. In addition, the 3,000 sets of breastplate armor worn by the first 3 rows of 20,000 Swiss mercenaries are also in my hands. As for the spears and swords, it goes without saying. Maximilian I's eyes lit up. But soon, His Majesty the Emperor said a little disappointed. "It is true that you have a lot of armor, but I don't have so many wandering knights." According to Maximilian I's fixed thinking, plate armor is for knights. Without enough wandering knights to serve him, no one would wear more plate armor. But Marin quickly gave a new idea. "Your Majesty, plate armor may not be worn by knights, infantry can also. Can infantry wear plate armor? Can they bear it? After all, plate armor weighs dozens of kilograms, which is really not light. Ordinary men wearing full-body plate armor can last for a short period of time. But it is really difficult to charge and fight in plate armor weighing dozens of kilograms. Aren't the veterans in the first 3 rows of the Swiss wearing breastplates and helmets?" Marin retorted. "That's true. You mean, let the soldiers of my newly formed army fight in half-body plate armor. Not everyone is needed, generally the first 3 rows are enough. But considering the strong fighting power of the Swiss, it is better to have more people wear plate armor. In this way, you don't have to worry about the long hair of the Swiss." After a pause, Marin continued. "Moreover, you can select people who are very strong and let them wear a full set of plate armor to lead the charge. The Swiss spears are somewhat difficult to deal with people wearing a full set of plate armor. Facing plate armor knights, they can use spears to poke the warhorse, facing plate armor infantry, where do they poke? Maximilian I thought about it, it was true. The plate armor in the late Middle Ages in Europe was still very abnormal, almost covering the whole person. Even the crotch bulged out to protect the little brother. Even if you want to poke someone's balls, you have to face high protection. If you wear half-body plate armor like the Swiss mercenary veterans, the opponent can poke your thigh with a spear. But if you wear full-body plate armor, there is no place to poke. Soldiers wearing full sets of plate armor can bravely face the Swiss spear formation, hit them hard, and then cut them down with a knife. Of course, you can't be too reckless. After all, there are also some special soldiers among the Swiss mercenaries who use hammers to deal with plate armor. However, those people are only a minority. As long as you are on guard against them, there is still no big problem. But, wearing a full set of moving is too physically demanding. Maximilian I was more worried about this. Your Majesty, you can let a small number of people with particularly good endurance wear full sets of plate armor and stand in front. Those in the back can only wear breastplate armor, or even nothing. That makes sense. Maximilian I nodded, but he was still worried that the infantry wearing plate armor would not have enough endurance. Your Majesty, if you occupy Switzerland, who will be anxious? You or the Swiss? Marin persuaded Maximilian I when he saw that he was so entangled. Of course it is the Swiss who are anxious. We have almost occupied 2 states. That's right. As long as the Swiss are anxious, you can take a large group of soldiers wearing plate armor, stand there in formation, and wait for the Swiss mercenaries to rush up. Anyway, they are anxious. And if you stand there in plate armor waiting for the enemy to rush, you can save a lot of physical strength. This is probably the so-called waiting for the enemy to work hard. Maximilian I thought about it carefully and found that what Marin said was right. Now it is the Austrian army that has occupied the Swiss hometown, and it is the Swiss who should be anxious. At this time, the Austrian warriors just need to stand there in formation and wait for the Swiss to attack. The Swiss are not good at using muskets, and spears and bows and arrows have little lethality to plate armor. The only thing to be wary of is probably the opponent's war hammer. However, the soldiers of the Habsburg family are not fools. When you see someone holding a hammer, just stab him to death first. Finally, after repeated deductions and calculations, Maximilian I decided to buy 2,000 sets of plate armor and 3,000 sets of half-plate armor for fighting the Swiss. Among them, he would select 2,000 particularly strong men from the army, wearing full sets of plate armor to stand at the forefront of the battle formation to resist the attack of the Swiss. Then, behind them were 3,000 relatively strong soldiers wearing half-plate armor, like the elite infantry of the Swiss, ready to support the 2,000 soldiers in full sets of plate armor in front at any time. Anyway, all they had to do was to stop the counterattack of the Swiss mercenaries, not to attack them. After all, it was them who occupied the land now. The initiative was in the hands of the Habsburg family. If the Swiss wanted to take back their homeland, they had to launch a charge. Unless they are willing to give up their hometown. But that is impossible. In the end, in addition to 2,000 sets of full-body plate armor and 3,000 sets of half-body plate armor, worn by the Swiss, Maximilian I also bought tens of thousands of second-hand spears from Marin, all of which were used by Swiss mercenaries. In this way, after hard sales, Marin sold 2,000 sets of full-body plate armor, 3,000 sets of half-body plate armor worn by elite Swiss veterans, and 10,000 second-hand Swiss spears to Maximilian I at a half-price discount. The total price reached as much as 250,000 gold coins. Although he gave the emperor a big discount and made less money, Marin did not regret it. Because he knew that the emperor needed such support, otherwise it would be difficult to beat the counterattacking Swiss. In Marin's view, the Habsburg family basically controlled Switzerland, and then suffered fierce resistance from the Swiss supported by France, which was what Marin wanted to see most. If the emperor is not supported now, perhaps the Habsburgs will not even be able to control Switzerland, let alone suppress the Swiss resistance. Trapping the Habsburgs and the Swiss mountaineers on the battlefield in Switzerland is the result that Marin most wants to see. For this reason, Marin sold a large number of weapons and armor to the emperor at half price to cheer the emperor and win the battle. Besides, these weapons and armor were forcibly stripped from the captured soldiers of Saxony, Brandenburg, and Switzerland, and Marin was not asked to pay the cost at all. Being able to sell them for 250,000 gold coins is already a huge profit. As for the remaining plate armor and weapons, as long as the price is more favorable, they can be sold. At this time, Marin suddenly remembered that since the thousands of Swiss mercenaries such as the Sieg Mercenary Corps who originally helped the Principality of Guedes to capture West Frisia were going back to the country to participate in the war, the combat effectiveness of the Principality of Guedes, which originally had a large number of Swiss mercenaries, would be greatly reduced. The more than 10,000 local warriors of the Principality of Guedes could not stop Marin's army at all, without any chance. Therefore, if Marin took his army back and asked the Principality of Guedes for West Frisia, the other party would not dare to refuse, unless the other party was desperate and wanted to die. In any case, because of the outbreak of war in Switzerland, the thousands of Swiss mercenaries of the Principality of Guedes had to return home. As a result, the Principality of Guedes was greatly weakened, and it had no strength to fight against Marin. Chapter 548, Louis XII's Concerns. In Europe, since the news that Marin wiped out 50,000 elite troops of the Bosse coalition outside the city of Lübeck spread, it caused an uproar. The German princes were fine. Although they knew it early, they had long been pulled into the anti-Marin alliance by Frederick III. In addition, they were confident in the group fight and were not afraid. It is not without reason that the Holy Roman Empire was torn apart, but it could stand proudly in the middle of Europe. A German prince is a chicken, and a group of German princes are a powerful wolf pack. But in other parts of Europe, everyone was stunned. The French were shocked by the size and strong combat effectiveness of Marin's army. Now, whether it is a court banquet or a dance, the French nobles are enthusiastically discussing this unprecedented war in European history. Even when the dissolute French nobles were having an affair, they would discuss it with their affair partners. Although their military views were relatively naive, this incident still became popular and popular throughout France. The French nobles only regarded this war as an after-dinner entertainment, but King Louis XII of France didn't think so. As a monarch with good ability, Louis XII discovered a terrible fact, that is, if Marin's 40,000 troops acted together with the Habsburg family's army, the Habsburg dynasty would be invincible, whether it was unifying Germany or fighting against France. Therefore, Louis XII has been worried recently, his appetite is not very good, and even his interest in creating offspring is somewhat lacking. Fortunately, good news soon came from Germany. The defeated Elector Frederick III of Saxony organized most of the German princes, forced Marin to bow his head, and even forced Marin to publicly draw a line with the Habsburg dynasty. Although he knew that Marin's public announcement of drawing a line with Maximilian I was forced, Louis XII felt very happy. In fact, what Louis XII didn't know was that Marin publicly announced that he had drawn a line with Maximilian I, and he looked reluctant, but he was actually willing. As a time traveler with 30,000 to 40,000 soldiers, how could Marin be willing to be inferior to others? It was also a forced choice to rely on His Majesty the Emperor before. Now that his wings are hard, he should have flown solo long ago. However, if he rashly betrays the Emperor, Marin will lose face. Now, those princes are forcing him to draw a line with the Emperor. Marin is very unhappy on the surface, but he is actually very happy in his heart. It can be said that it is just what he wants. Of course, King Louis XII of France is not clear about these. He is still worried about whether Marin will help His Majesty the Emperor. After that, a bigger bad news came because almost all the mercenaries in Switzerland left. Switzerland was extremely empty. So, the cunning Maximilian I ordered a general named Frundsberg to lead an army of 10,000 and suddenly attack the birthplace of the Habsburg family, the Swiss state of Aargau. That's not all. The Habsburg army, in one go, not only captured the canton of Aargau, but also invaded the most powerful canton in Switzerland, the canton of Zurich, and was about to destroy the canton of Zurich. For France, this is very fatal. The canton of Zurich is the most powerful of the 10 cantons of the Swiss Confederation. Its standing army is maintained at around 7,000 to 8,000 people. It is the most powerful of the 10 original cantons in Switzerland and has always been the leading canton of the Swiss Confederation against the Habsburgs. If Zurich falls, then the Swiss Confederation will lose its most powerful force and leader. Although the canton of Bern in the west is also powerful, it has more mountains and is not as populous and economically developed as the canton of Zurich. The terrain of Switzerland is high in the south and low in the north. Zurich is in the north and is also one of the flattest cantons in Switzerland. Until later generations, the canton of Zurich has always been the most populous canton in Switzerland. If the canton of Zurich falls, the good situation of the Swiss Confederation against the Habsburgs will become completely bad. The reason why Louis XII was extremely worried about the situation in Switzerland was that he saw that Maximilian I was playing a big game. What big game? Louis XII saw that Maximilian I was determined to open up the communication channel between Austria and the County of Burgundy. The County of Burgundy was in the Franche-Comté region of later generations, just in the northwest of Switzerland. There was just Switzerland between it and Austria. Now, Maximilian I has taken over the Graubünden region in southeastern Switzerland. If he takes over the cantons of Aargau and Zurich, and then takes over the canton of St. Gallen to the east, or goes south to seize the cantons of Schwyz, the origin of the name of Switzerland, Walden and Uri, which the Habsburg family has always been thinking about, and then looks for an opportunity to annex the canton of Basel in the northwest, then the two major territories under the name of the Habsburg family, Austria and the County of Burgundy, will be connected. And this is exactly what Louis XII was most worried about. Why was Louis XII worried about the territories of the Habsburg family being connected? This matter has to start from Burgundy. At the beginning, Maximilian I inherited the vast territory of the Duchy of Burgundy after marrying Mary, the only daughter of Charles the Bold. This territory includes the current County of Burgundy, later Franche-Comté, the Duchy of Burgundy annexed by France, later Burgundy, France, and the Netherlands. However, because Charles the Bold died in battle, the then French King Louis XI, Charles VIII's father, took the opportunity to occupy the Duchy of Burgundy, and attack the County of Burgundy in the Netherlands. Fortunately, Maximilian I defeated the invasion of the French army in the Battle of Ginegat. However, due to insufficient strength, Maximilian I only retained the Netherlands and the County of Burgundy. However, the fertile and rich Duchy of Burgundy region, near Paris fell into the hands of France. In fact, France had no choice but to seize the territory of the Duchy of Burgundy. Because the geographical location of the Duchy of Burgundy is too special, it is located in the southeast of the Paris Basin in France, very close to Paris. If Maximilian I had mastered the Duchy of Burgundy, then his army could easily reach Paris. How can you allow others to snore beside your bed? For the safety of Paris, the French royal family must die to take over the Duchy of Burgundy region. But the problem is that from the perspective of Maximilian I, it is obvious that France has robbed him of a large piece of land, and he must not accept it. If Maximilian I opened up the connection and road between Austria and the County of Burgundy, Franche-Comté, then France would be in trouble. Maximilian I must have thought about taking back the Duchy of Burgundy area that was robbed by the French, but the French would definitely not give it back to him for the safety of the capital. Therefore, both sides will definitely start fighting at that time. If the road from Austria to the County of Burgundy is unblocked, the Habsburgs will be able to continuously transport soldiers and supplies from Austria, which can pose a huge threat to the French. Moreover, they have sufficient reasons: I am here to recover my homeland. Therefore, Louis XII is absolutely unwilling to see the Habsburgs really occupy Switzerland and open up the connection between Austria and the County of Burgundy. Because this means that the Habsburg army can threaten the hinterland of France. Therefore, after careful consideration, King Louis XII of France made the decision to fully support the Swiss in resisting the invasion of the Habsburgs. To this end, he decided to send all the Swiss mercenaries in the French army and the Duchy of Guede's army back to Switzerland through France, first defending the second strongest state of Bern in Switzerland, and then counterattacking. However, what worries Louis XII the most is whether Marin will participate in the war. If the 40,000 troops under Marin also joined the war, then the fall of Switzerland would be almost inevitable. If Marin did not join the war, the Swiss would have a chance. Chapter 549, Princess Margaret's Amazing Inference. Louis XII's worries did not come true after all. In fact, Maximilian I did hope to use the military strength of Marin. However, Marin seemed to be scared by the princes and did not dare to send troops. Moreover, because Switzerland was empty, Maximilian I did not seem to need to ask Marin for help to attack Switzerland at this time. After all, the current situation is still favorable to the Habsburg family. Faced with Maximilian I's confidence, Marin smiled and said nothing. However, he knew in his heart how difficult the road to conquering Switzerland was. Relying on the advantage of the first move, Marin estimated that it would not be a big problem for the emperor to control the states of Aargau and Zurich. You know, the commander of the Austrian army was named Frundsberg. Frundsberg and I have studied for so long, and I am very talented. After getting the land, it is still no problem to keep it. Several states in the east and south are not a problem. The biggest problem is several states in the west. It is close to France over there, and the French will definitely do their best to protect Switzerland. At the critical moment, it is possible that the French army will personally go down. Therefore, the final result is probably that the Austrian army controls some areas in northern and eastern Switzerland. Then, the Swiss army supported by France will fight a tug-of-war in the three central forest states Schwyz, Walden and Uri, competing for control here. In fact, Emperor Maximilian I is not unable to guess such an outcome. However, faced with the temptation to control Switzerland, no one in the Habsburg family can refuse. Even if this road is full of blood and difficulties. Maybe this is the so-called family honor. Switzerland is the obsession of the Habsburg family members. If they don't take Switzerland, the Habsburg family members will definitely be unwilling. However, this price is so high. Marin can't understand this family honor. After all, he is a modern soul. Moreover, his family has no lost territory. Because, in terms of his bloodline, no ancestor is more powerful than him. However, Marin gave the fierce General Frundsberg to Maximilian I, which also increased the weight of the emperor's success. After all, Frundsberg was gifted, and after learning the Spanish phalanx and other advanced tactical ideas from Marin, he would definitely be a very powerful general in the future. However, what made Marin laugh was that Austria also encountered the same dilemma as Marin, lack of saltpeter. Before, the Austrian army did not use muskets, so there was naturally almost no demand for saltpeter. However, after Frundsberg brought the tactics of the Spanish phalanx to the Austrian army, the demand for gunpowder increased greatly. But the problem is that Austria does not produce saltpeter. Now, Austria's saltpeter can only rely on skilled craftsmen to find saltpeter soil at the base of toilets and stables, and then refine it to get saltpeter. For this reason, Maximilian I also imitated Marin's approach and set up saltpeter officials to break into people's toilets and stables everywhere. However, the amount of saltpeter obtained in this way is very limited. Marin was able to supply the navy with so much gunpowder thanks to the saltpeter bought from India. Otherwise, with the speed at which those heavy artillery consumed gunpowder, Marin could not afford it at all. Maximilian I had no way to buy saltpeter from India, so he could only rely on saltpeter made from saltpeter soil collected by saltpeter officials to meet the demand. In such a shortage of saltpeter and gunpowder, Maximilian I only formed 3,000 musketeers, no more. It was not that he was unwilling to expand the scale of the musketeers, but the supply of gunpowder was never enough, and it was already very good to be able to supply the needs of 3,000 musketeers. In addition, there were many artillery pieces in Maximilian I's army, and those things consumed a lot of gunpowder. What makes Marin laugh the most is that at present, those craftsmen who know how to extract saltpeter don't seem to understand that saltpeter comes mainly from urine, but always think it comes from feces. Therefore, those craftsmen don't know that saltpeter can be extracted from soil soaked in urine, but do not leave feces, and even regard the solid feces as the main source of saltpeter. However, Marin will not explain modern chemical knowledge such as nitrogen and chemical changes to those craftsmen, nor correct their misunderstandings. After all, Marin doesn't want these European natives to improve the efficiency of saltpeter extraction. Otherwise, their saltpeter production has greatly increased, which threatens the firepower advantage of their army. In the absence of saltpeter, Frundsberg knew that Marin's Spanish phalanx was the mainstream of the future army, and using more muskets could increase the chances of winning, but due to the limited production of saltpeter, Frundsberg could not have more musketeers and artillery. But he didn't know that soon, the only 3,000 musketeers under his command would bring him and His Majesty the Emperor a huge surprise in the conflict and hegemony in Switzerland. The matchlock gun had a slow firing rate, was troublesome to use, and was afraid of rain. In a frontal field battle, the matchlock gun would have insufficient firepower due to its slow firing rate and the distance between the musketeers. Moreover, the musketeers were extremely afraid of the enemy breaking into the formation. In that case, the musketeers would be easily slaughtered by the enemy. However, if the musketeers were given a wall as a cover to defend the city, the role of the matchlock gun would be greatly improved, and the attackers would want to curse. It was with the help of the 3,000 musketeers that Frundsberg led the Austrian army to withstand the crazy counterattack of the Swiss and French. Not to mention Switzerland and France, in England, far outside the European continent, the story of Marin leading an army of 40,000 to completely annihilate the extremely powerful 50,000 Botha coalition forces also spread. Ordinary English people may only regard this as a novelty, but Princess Margaret of the York family, who has been cooperating with the North Sea Chamber of Commerce for a long time, seems to have thought of something. Marin, as the owner of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, has always been hidden behind the scenes and has never revealed his true identity to anyone. However, Edward of the York family, who has cooperated with Marin, as well as forces such as France and Scotland, including Princess Margaret, are all very clear that the North Sea Chamber of Commerce is a very powerful force. Before, when the Scottish army was scouring northern England, Princess Margaret secretly sent her men to Newcastle and other places in the north to inquire about the news, and also learned that an organization called the Morgan Chamber of Commerce had recruited mercenaries in Newcastle. However, Princess Margaret always felt that the organization called the Morgan Chamber of Commerce acted mysteriously and its style was very similar to the North Sea Chamber of Commerce. Combined with the rumor that tens of thousands of English mercenaries suddenly appeared in Marin's army during this war, Princess Margaret came to an astonishing conclusion: perhaps the master behind the North Sea Chamber of Commerce and the Morgan Chamber of Commerce was the man named Marin who defeated the 50,000-strong Bossa coalition outside the city of Lubeck. Chapter 550 Secret Letter. After getting such an inference, Princess Margaret herself was stunned. She couldn't imagine why a German prince would interfere in the affairs of England. Moreover, this guy's military strength was so strong. So, Princess Margaret of the York family began to collect intelligence about Marin, including information related to the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, including the situation of the Morgan Chamber of Commerce. After summarizing, Princess Margaret discovered an important situation, that is, the North Sea Chamber of Commerce has a lot of food, while the Morgan Chamber of Commerce attaches great importance to the coal mines in Newcastle. In addition, after helping his brother Edward, the North Sea Chamber of Commerce once asked for a place, the Hill of Tara on the island of Ireland. However, after sending people to dig deep underground, they stopped digging because of large-scale water seepage. If the behind-the-scenes bosses of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce and the Morgan Chamber of Commerce are both Marin Hoffman, then Princess Margaret came to an important conclusion: this person has abundant food, but is very interested in coal resources. Even helping his brother in Ireland was for the unknown minerals underground. Moreover, Princess Margaret concluded that even if Marin Hoffman was not the master behind the North Sea Chamber of Commerce and the Morgan Chamber of Commerce, he had a very special relationship with them. Because, in the Battle of Lubeck, the 10,000 English mercenaries who appeared were clearly recruited by the Morgan Chamber of Commerce in Newcastle. And those 10,000 English mercenaries are said to be quite powerful, and they successfully attacked and defeated the flank of the Bossa coalition with Swiss mercenaries. If those 10,000 mercenaries could be hired to help his brother, there would be a great chance of defeating Henry VII. You know, the total number of troops that Henry VII could gather was only 10,000 to 20,000. Edward now has more than 10,000 troops. If those 10,000 English mercenaries are added, there would be a great chance of defeating Henry VII. Besides, that Marin Hoffman seemed to have started out as a mercenary and became famous after fighting for Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, and won military exploits. Before that, it was said that he was just a wandering knight without inheritance rights, not even a noble. If he could hire this man to fight for his brother, wouldn't it be easy to defeat Henry VII with his 40,000 troops? Once his brother became king, her sister would immediately become noble and become the eldest princess. Unlike now, she is just an embarrassed princess, and is also under the surveillance of Henry VII. Although it is said that after her brother became king, Princess Margaret's status has only improved one step: the princess became a princess. However, the treatment is very different. Because now she is basically a half-prisoner monitored and suspected by Henry VII. Even Richard Pole, the husband appointed by Henry VII, is also monitoring her. Princess Margaret does not like her husband Richard Pole, Henry VII's loyal dog. Because the other party loves Henry VII more than herself. How can there be such a husband who helps outsiders monitor himself? Therefore, Princess Margaret does not like her current life. But she had no way to resist before. Because her title of Earl of Salisbury was basically empty. The real power of the fiefdom was all in the hands of her husband Richard Pole. As a princess, she had limited money. It was very inconvenient for her to do anything. Until, the people of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce found her and asked her to act as the agent for the sale of grain in England. Then, Princess Margaret took advantage of the opportunity to act as the agent for the sale of grain by the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, and privately intercepted a large amount of money by falsely reporting the import price and sales of grain, and began to bribe all kinds of useful people. First, she helped her brother escape from the Tower of London and escaped the death penalty. Then, Princess Margaret, who had money and people in her hands, turned into a spy and quietly helped her brother collect useful intelligence in London, hoping to help her brother as much as possible. She was desperate for her husband Richard Pole. Before the last expedition, she begged her husband not to kill her brother. However, her husband Richard Pole didn't care much about her begging, but listened to his master Henry VII and wanted to kill Edward strongly. In fact, before coming to this conclusion, Princess Margaret didn't have much ambition. Although she thought about her brother successfully overthrowing Henry VII and becoming the King of England, Princess Margaret didn't think it would become a reality. Because Henry VII's rule was very stable and his strength was much stronger than his brother. It was already very good that her brother Edward could gain a foothold on the island of Ireland and compete with Henry VII. It seemed unlikely to do better. But after getting this amazing inference, Princess Margaret changed her mind. She began to think that it didn't seem too difficult for her brother to become the King of England. As long as she could win over this very capable Marin Hoffman, defeating Henry VII didn't seem to be a problem. You know, Marin Hoffman was able to mobilize 40,000 troops and defeated 50,000 elite enemy troops including 20,000 Swiss mercenaries. If he was willing to help his brother attack Henry VII, victory would be almost certain. Henry VII could only mobilize more than 20,000 troops at most, at least half of which were local troops with little combat effectiveness. The real elite troops were no more than 10,000. As long as Marin Hoffman was willing to send troops to help his brother, he would not need more. As long as he had 20,000 elite troops, he could defeat Henry VII and regain the throne. According to the information, this man was born as a mercenary, not one of those reserved nobles. As long as his brother was willing to pay the price, such as giving him Newcastle, he was still very confident that he could be persuaded to send troops. Moreover, giving Newcastle to this man could be said to kill two birds with one stone. Why? Because Newcastle is located in the northeast of England, which is a border area bordering Scotland. If Newcastle is given to this man, it can also help him block the invasion of Scotland. On the contrary, because of the threat from Scotland, even if this man is enthroned as the Lord of Newcastle, because of the threat from Scotland in the north, he will not have the energy to take care of the affairs in the south, and will not affect his brother's control of the overall situation. As for worrying about his becoming too big and rebelling, Europeans don't seem to have such concerns. Princess Margaret also did not think that the other party who became the Earl of Newcastle would rebel. Why? Because the other party did not have the blood of the English royal family. Although England often had incidents of fighting for the throne and deposing the king. However, everyone who participated in the fight for the throne had royal blood. People without royal blood were not qualified to participate in the fight for the throne. At most, they chose to support a member of the royal family. Therefore, Princess Margaret of the York family believed that it was feasible to win over Marin Hoffman and help her brother fight for the throne of England. Moreover, it was the only feasible way for her brother to ascend the throne. As a smart woman, Princess Margaret deeply understood that although France and Scotland supported her brother, they did not mean to help her brother seize the throne with all their strength, but only hoped that her brother would cause trouble for Henry VII and prevent Britain from being stable. If she wanted her brother to seize the throne, she had to rely on a fierce general like Marin. As long as he was offered a county, he would be tempted. Through previous cases, Princess Margaret discovered that every time Marin Hoffman defeated his opponent in a war, he would always ask the opponent to cede a large piece of land. Therefore, Princess Margaret determined that Marin Hoffman was a person who valued land very much. As long as he was given the Northumberland county including Newcastle, he would be tempted. As for the original Earl of Northumberland, he was Henry VII's man anyway, so at most he could be killed or his title abolished. After thinking about all this, Princess Margaret wrote a secret letter to tell her brother about her plan and strongly recommended that her brother carry out this plan. Before her brother succeeded in his rebellion, Princess Margaret began to guide him. It can be seen that if Edward really seized the throne of England, this princess, at that time, she should be called a princess, would definitely stir up the situation and control the government of England. In this secret letter, Margaret selected her most trusted subordinates, chose the right time, and after arriving in Wales, she crossed the sea by boat in the middle of the night and headed for Ireland. Now there are fewer British ships in the Irish Sea, because most of these warships were requisitioned by the royal family from the Five Ports Alliance, and they were originally merchant ships. Merchant ships, of course, have to transport goods to make money. It's okay to fight for the king in a short period of time, but you can't stay on the battlefield all the time. Therefore, most of the merchant ships from the Five Ports Alliance have gone back to transport goods to make money, leaving only a small number of ships to continue patrolling the Irish Sea and the English Channel, guarding against the movements of Ireland and France. Therefore, there are fewer British ships in the Irish Sea between the British Isles and the Irish Isles. If you take a fast boat to cross the sea at night, you can still go back and forth conveniently if you are careful. The confidant arranged by Princess Margaret also safely carried the letter across the Irish Sea overnight and arrived on the island of Ireland.